Now remember, I already gone over the Midway battle and the naval combat system here and how it works, and it works real well to historical accuracy. And then another aspect I want to talk about real quick, just to put down some essentials, is supply lines and some strategic redeployment and some strategic warfare stuff. And again, this has to do with like the Battle of the Solomon Islands. You know, there was a lot of surface engagements going on. You know, 6-7 naval battles around the islands. They were all centered around both sides trying to reinforce the island, and both sides trying to supply their men on the island. And in this game, that equates to like strategic redeployment for us. We're going to try to strategic redeploy troops to the island, which can be intercepted, and we need to run supply lines through to the islands, which can be intercepted. And this will cause us to have numerous surface engagements and even carrier battles. Now, unlike that one decisive battle that we're looking for in the Pacific, or may not be looking for, you can still run into a lot of numerous ones like this. And it reminds me of sort of like running a guerrilla army. You know, because as with the carriers, you can do hit and run tactics, you can do decoys, you can do like ambushes, you know, sort of hit and run. You only fight that decisive battle when you want to, and you avoid it when you want to. So in that aspect, it is very interesting. It's very intriguing to me the way the Pacific works. So let's just look at the supply real quick. Supply sources for the Japanese are Tokyo, then on the mainland you have Seoul. That's an unlimited supply source. Truk, and these two you're going to be using against Americans majority of the time. And then the oil centers here, Palembang and Brunei, they are unlimited supply sources for the Japanese. And then for the US, it's these boxes, US, Australia, South Pacific, Indian boxes. And you have Pearl Harbor, the Dutch Harbor, Colombo, the Indian hexes on the western edge of the board, the Australian hexes on the southern edge of the board, are all unlimited supply sources for Western Allied units. Now, supply has to be run to your island groups. Now, island groups are a little different than just running to each army unit or air base or naval air factor on a 1-hex island. If you run supply to just one island in the group, then the entire island group is supplied. You don't have to hit every island, as long as you control the island group. And you have to run a separate supply line to each island group. So you'd run one from Truk to the Marshalls, one from Truk to the Gilberts, one from Truk to wherever you're at, Rabaul. Okay, you have to run separate supply lines. And supply lines can end in a port or 1-hex island. Now, I'm not going to keep saying port or 1-hex island. Okay, I'm just going to keep saying 1-hex islands. But of course, ports can take it. But what's interesting is the 1-hex islands. 1-hex islands can base 9-factor fleets. 1-hex islands can base 1 naval air factor. And that's the critical part when we're playing this game, is the search modifiers you get from naval air factors, and 1 land-based air factor that can be in a city. They also can search. Remember, whoever finds the enemy is going to have the advantage, and having multiple search modifiers on your side is definitely going to help. But in order for your search modifiers to work, your aircraft, and in order to move ships that may be on ports out on these island groups, they have to be supplied. Another thing is a supply line. no matter how far you trace it. It can go as far as you want. But every 10 C hexes, you have to be able to reach a port or 1 hex island that you control. So keep that in mind. Now that has to do with seaborne invasions. You can't make a sea, for example, the Japanese cannot invade Hawaii unless they control a 1 hex island or port within 10 sea hexes of it. And as you see here, without Wake, they don't have that. Now, without Johnston Island, because you can reach Johnston Island from the Marshalls, you would have to take Johnston Island first. So you got to remember, you got to keep some supplied 1 hex island or port every 10 hexes. That's why it takes a while to push out toward the Americans, and for the Americans to push back at the Japanese, it takes a while. You can't just run all the way into Japan. You have to have at least every 10 hexes a supplied, controlled 1 hex island or port. And one other aspect of the supply is, in our game here in the Pacific, everything is considered supplied out on the islands and wherever you're fighting. Every turn you can just act like you're in supplied. The onus is put on the opposing player. Whenever he wants to cut a supply line to some troop or ask where your supply line is coming from with whatever forces you have, then you tell him where your supply line is coming from. Other than that, you don't waste time listing all your supply routes every turn. You just move on in the game until the opponent requests it. And you can find that in 29.334. As far as our strategy goes, we were looking at trying to hit Pearl Harbor. And I don't even think I would try to go for it. Because here's what's happening. Winter 41, the Japanese Navy is stretched to its limits everywhere and all its other priorities. Now I do make an invasion here on Leh, and I drop one off here at Baru, here in the Gilberts, to take these. Instead of doing like maybe Leh, I can take the 1-3 and the 1-2 and take Johnston, which is a prerequisite to hitting Pearl Harbor. Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. First, you have to knock it down below 9 fleets. In the winter of 41, you're going to destroy about 13 ships. You're going to have about 12 to 13 ships left on Pearl Harbor. That means in 42 spring, you have to bring out another patrol and strike the port down below 9. That's your first, what if. Shouldn't be too big of a problem unless there are like 3 American carriers there. Well, now you got to fight carriers, which is really what we're after. So, or if the carriers aren't there, then you got to hit the ships. So that's your first problem. Second is, you do have to have a port or 1 hex island supplied within 10 hexes of your invasion hex. So if Pearl's the invasion hex, the closest one we would need is Midway or Johnston. Now Midway is going to take an effort, and we have to take Wake to get to Midway. But because we own the Marshalls, we're within 10 hexes. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we would be able to invade Johnston on the winter of 41. Then in the spring of 42, we would bring the patrol out. We have to knock this down, and then we would have to have an invasion force. Now the invasion force has to be based within 20 hexes of Pearl Harbor. The only one that fits that description, if you want a port, would be the Dutch harbor up there. and I don't even, and maybe Pago. That's the only ones that fit the 20 hex rule. Well, you're not going to get those. You know, I ain't going to waste my time getting those. So the other thing we would do is you would base 9-factor fleets. You can have up to 9 fleets on 1 hex islands. You can have one here, one here, one here, and one on Kawajawan. So it'd be, you can still have 36 ships here, and they're all within 20 of Pearl Harbor. Okay? So, being within 20 of Pearl Harbor, you would have to SR the ships here, because remember, in the winter, they're all doing stuff. You'd have to use SRs and SR at least a 2-2 infantry. The one naval force you have that's going to be used over here for the invasion, he has to get over here in an SR. And then, actually, if you want to use the Marine, it has to be 50% of your attacking force. So you'd only be able to use a 1-2 regular Japan Army unit and then a 1-2 Marine. And then he wouldn't be tripled here, he'd only be doubled. So he would have 6 infantry here. They're going to be doubled to a 12. You would hit him with 2. You need to come up with 10 more. In spring of 42, you could probably, you're going to have the 36 factors of ships based there. You can have 3 times the amount of shore bombardment. So with 2 infantry attacking, 2 times 3 is 6. You can put 6 shore bombardment on that, which you're going to have. So that brings it up to an 8. And basically, you're not even at a 1-to-1 yet. You would have to use your patrol force for your patrol force would have to provide an offensive mission, ground support. The only other thing you would do is wait till the summer of 42. And at that point, we make an invasion here at Hilo. And then we SR 5-3 aircraft there. Now you have 5-3 aircraft in support. And you would probably be able to invade in the fall of 42 if all of these prerequisites are met that I just mapped out. Now, for me, no way. I say forget that. There's too many ifs going on. And then taking Pearl Harbor, what does that do for you? Well, it allows you a radar base. But the Americans are still going to be able to come down the South Pacific box, get in this area, and start fighting somewhere until they get strong enough to take Pearl back. So if they keep up with their plan, that you can watch the videos of the global war game I made, how the Americans get everything down in this area and attack here, they really don't need Pearl. So that's just it. I say Pearl, no bueno. If you guys can show me that you can take Pearl in a reasonable amount of time and, you know, without sacrificing, you know, too much stuff over here, hey, show me. I say forget it, don't do it. So here's what my game plan is going to be. We're going to go ahead and make our strike in 41. I'm going to do everything else, but we're going to come back in 42 and make another strike. Because remember, I want to draw the carriers out, and I want a decisive carrier battle right now. So let's draw them out. Let's bomb Pearl Harbor again. Now that could hurt our planes, but we'll see. I'm going after the carriers. We're going to be looking for a decisive carrier battle right away. That's going to be the strategy. In the meantime, we're going to take the objectives. We're going to go after Wake, Midway, Johnston, and then we're going to come down this way for Suva. And if we can have our defensive line here, take this, take Guadalcanal, get Port Moresby, and then put all our pressure on taking Cairns. If we own all this, that's what I'm going to decide to do in this game, and we're going to see if we can do it. I still think that the best Japanese plan is what I did in the global war game video I showed you. But this is just in case you have a Japanese player that wants to be more aggressive. This is, and you know, change it up. Maybe this is what I would go for, taking these objectives. And then with that being done, At the same time, you know, not only take all our stuff here, but take Colombo. And then we can start hitting, this time, with us putting all the pressure way out there, we're not going to spend money on declaring war on Russia. We're already at war with Britain. And our front boundaries is right through here. So we would spend no offensive options and no declaring war in this Asian front. All our offensive options are going to be on the Pacific or Southeast Pacific, just these two. And that's where everything's at, and that's where everything we're dealing with. We'll try to get these objectives. We're going to take Colombo. And I'm not going to say we'll conquer India, but that'll hurt Britain enough where we can get the money down. And if we at least threaten India, conquering India here, Britain may have to, it may be tough for Britain on that side. Because remember, in a global war game, we want to do anything we can to help Germany. If you don't, the Germans will lose. I mean, if they lose, you lose. No matter what you're doing over here, you will end up losing if the Germans lose. You got to help the Germans. So we're going to try India, and we're going to go after all the objectives. I don't know if I mentioned, on the specific side, you can break down infantry factors into 2-2 infantry, 1-2 infantries. Okay, but of course you can never have more factors on the board than what you're allowed. Now, I basically use a setup that the General magazine gives until I can come up with something better. But there are so many important areas that you have to defend as the Allies. Of course, here being Burma, India, Australia, Rabaul, Port Moresby, Guadalcanal, that whole area right there. You know, and the Indonesian area, and Singapore, and Malaya, that you just can't defend at all. So what we're trying to do is make the Japanese waste as many BRPs as they possibly have to. So, what they suggest is this setup for Burma and India. What you're doing, because of the rules with the mountains and the jungles here, you can't just move across them easily. So if you block the valley here with just a 1-2, on the first turn, the Japanese, no matter what they put in here, they can't start in Thailand. Even though it's an associated minor ally, they can't start there. They have to start right here. So all they are able to do is attack this Indian unit. Now, of course, he wants to put every tank he can over here for the armor units to advance to Mandalay and then try to attack these 1-2s that are over the river and in jungle mountain hexes is going to be pretty difficult. I'm not saying they can't do it. Sure they can. But it would take everything they have just to try to reach this and go for one of these attacks. Then on their turn flip-flop, they will try to advance through India. Again, you got a mountain here. This is cut off by this river. And that's why I have a strong 2-2 backed by 2-3 aircraft. They're still going to have to attack this, win this, and exploit through. The farthest they can get is probably right here. And that's with a maximum effort. Me, I've never tried it. It takes way too much when you have all this other stuff for the Japanese to do. So this defense protects this setup against the turn flip-flop. And that's why I use it. Now, will Rangoon fall? Of course. Who cares? You're going to lose the 10 BRPs here. What you don't want to lose is India. Is Thailand, that'll all make go to the Japanese. Nothing you can do about it. So the next setup is Malaysia. Now, Malaysia has Singapore here, in which you have to start these British units. This many British units have to start in India, and the setup for this is like we showed, is the 2-3 protecting this 2-2 Indian, and the armor unit on Calcutta protecting that. The air base is just so if the Japanese do destroy this, they want to SR units because they won't be able to walk them up here and help the next attack. They're going to have to SR units up here. Well, the airbase prevents any SR into this hex. Therefore, it leaves him limited when he continues his advance. That's why that's there. These have to stay on Colombo. We protect it with a 2-2 Indian and the carrier. Because Colombo will allow the Japanese to go into the Indian Ocean and conduct raiders against the British. So we defend that. On Singapore, you have to start this fleet and 3 infantry vectors. So they're there. So what we're trying to do here now is to stop the Japanese from taking Singapore in one turn. And that's what this setup does. Now remember, on the first turn, whether you're playing a global game or the Empire of the Rising Sun game, on the first turn, there's a rule, the Allied Unpreparedness. They're minus a 1 DM. And the Japanese also are allowed to attack undefended beaches and move out of them as if it was a port and a sea transport. So, to put 1 Indian right here to defend this beach means the Japanese, they can come here, attack it, try to exploit to here, and then try to proceed to Singapore. Is going to be very, very tough for them to do. It's going to take maximum effort to do this. This blocks an overland route because right here in Singora you have a port. I don't know if you can see it. But the Japanese, it's cheaper for them to sea transport, so they'll be able to sea transport into this, attack this, and then move across. So the stronger unit goes here. And it's defending, both of these are just defending the overland route to Singapore. Okay, this is left open because we don't have the troops to defend it. See, if I didn't see this in the general, I would try to defend this. I'd be trying to throw troops everywhere instead of just keep focused on, all you're trying to do is restrict the Japanese and make them lose as much as possible. Because the Japanese will be able to use they have a paratrooper, they'll just drop on this and they can take it if they don't use it up here in India. But oh well, you lose Malaysia. Remember, the prize is Singapore. You want the Japanese to take 2 turns to take Singapore. So 1 turn this will fall, 1 turn Thailand, 1 turn Burma. Next, the Dutch have to set up in their capitals. You have to have the 1-2s in each hex. The ship and the plane I just put there, they can go on any one of the capitals, but you have to have a 1-2 on each one of these 3 capitals. And the ships I just put here to use against the Japanese invasion forces to try to stop one. And actually, when I played the Empire of the Rising Sun as the Allies, the Japanese player, he ran these invasions. You know, you're running invasions all over here, and I threw everything I could at him. That's just the way I do it. And I actually stopped one of the invasions. So the only piece of the British that doesn't have a setup limit is this replacement. The other replacement is right here in Hong Kong. But this one can go anywhere. And the oil field for Sarawak is right here at Brunei. They're going to take that. You can't hold all these beaches, and this is a beach too, but this is also worth 10 BRPs. So they figure that the best spot for that replacement, which will cause the Japanese trouble, is the 10 BRPs there. And again, if he wants it, he has to seaborne invasion, which takes ships and men to do it. So we're making the Japanese, cost them a lot to do this stuff. So that's the setup there. The Australians have a setup that you have to put here and here, and then we put some, they don't have to be in those hexes, but you have to have 5 infantry in the planes down here in Australia. So I put 2 on Cairns with 1 plane and 2 ships, and 3 on Darwin with 4 ships and a plane. So we got a plane protecting each one of these ports in case the Japanese in their turn flip-flop wants to come over and strike these ports and bomb it. They can, but they're going to take some losses. And then the rest of the units are just defending the objectives. Rabaul, Guadalcanal, and a 2-2 on Port Moresby. Because this one you really don't want to fall if you don't have to. Me as a Japanese, I find it hard to take Port Moresby on a turn flip-flop because you're doing all this other stuff. And then the other 1-2 goes out here on Suva on another objective. We can't cover them all. So this one
is a little better than this one, because as we come in from the South Pacific box, it'd be nice, you know, this one's a little farther out, but you can control this most likely, and you can start advancing to it. So that's the British setup. The next person that sets up is the Americans. Now everything here has a deployment limit. Okay? You're going to have three task forces that are broken down with the American carriers and 6 fleets each. One will start there. This is just by, you can use the rules of 67.4, which I'm going to do. 1 goes in the U.S. box and 2 are on missions, and that's why they're sitting like that. This force is in Pearl Harbor. You can read all the setup limits. On Midway, Wake, Dutch Harbor, Pago, Tatula. Okay, then the Philippines. Now the Philippines, basically, here's Manila. You want to try to stop the Japanese from taking the Philippines in one turn. That's the purpose of this setup. They can invade here, south of Luzon, and move up to Manila. They can invade at the beach north of Luzon, and they can invade Lingayen. So we protect all of these with a 1-2 replacement, 1-2, and then a 2-2 on Manila with the American fighter there. And this should be strong enough. Now, no matter how the Allies set up, there's certain things you can count on, certain things you have to do. You know, there's a lot going on here, and we're going to try to simplify it for you. For example, in China, I try to start with just this simple setup. Because in 1941, the Japanese have 5 BRPs. There's a couple things here. If you let the Chinese build partisans, they're going to take 2 of those away from you. So we can stop that, so we're gonna. 2, Chinese only has 5 BRPs to spend. Remember, they take their turn independent of the Allies in 1941. And then in 42, they'll get another turn with the Allies. But in 41, they can only spend 5 BRPs. That means if they try a limited offensive, they're only going to use 5 factors. But in spring 42, when you're still busy SRing and shoring up all your attacks and any ones that failed, you don't have the men or the resources or the ships to be supplying these bridgeheads and putting men back into China. You want to do that as little as possible. But in 42, the Chinese will have 10 BRPs to spend. So, right here, if we just put 2 3-2s on Canton with that bridge head, that will secure it. Don't overstack just because you have a bridgehead, because if you don't resupply that bridgehead, it's going to get lost, and then you'll lose any units that are overstacked. And it is an objective, so you don't want to lose that, because it'll take money from the Japanese, so you hold on to that. This one's less important, Fu Chao. 2-2-1-2, put 2 units there with the bridgehead, less important. And then on initial setup, just to give me as much infantry as possible to deal with out here, I'll start 5 aircraft here on the 2 objectives and the city, denying me having to set up infantry there and use them elsewhere, and then I'll get a turn to be able to occupy those hexes. And these planes will eventually fly out to deal with the Philippines. That's that. And then the last thing is, this is part of the Manchuria setup. Now, I'm not going to set all this up in the Russians. We're not going to really worry about that in this video. But one of the tanks from Manchuria go right here in the Manchuria hex, and it'll provide zone of control along these hexes to prevent partisans from setting up there. So this is your basic setup initial in China, and then I'll decide what else what's going on. Because you're going to look here and go, okay, how the Allies set up? And there's just certain things we know for sure. We know Palembang has to have a 1-2 on it. Doesn't matter if he puts the ship, plane, or whatever. Has to have the 1-2. So we set up a force to go ahead and take that out. And what we're going to use is this force right here. Now remember, you can only base 2 infantry in a port. So we're going to be using all these ports. It's going to have a Marine and an infantry, 6 ships to carry it, shore bombardment, plus with our patrol task force we're going to be sending out here, is going to attack Palembang at a 2-to-1. To hit Java, now remember, we can move inland, part of a Japanese special rule on the first turn. And the Japanese can move through the jungle, so they'll hit here at Surabaya, and then they move one to Pandung, and then they're going to attack at Batavia. And then with the Allied unpreparedness, it's only a 1. You're not seaborne invading that. So you come over, I come over with 6 ships, and these 2 1-2s based here at Haiphong. That's going to take care of that one. So there's 15 BRPs, there's 15 BRPs. This one is the farthest away for submarines, Allied submarines, to operate and do much. And so this is the one I will take a 1-to-1 on. And with that one, we use this force that's based at Cam Bay, and we're going to come over with a 1-to-1 with some exchange bait to try to take that out. Now with that being said, that's what we're going to set up for. He has 3 infantry we got to deal with there. So I'm going to plan that. So we're going to take it step by step. So like I said, no matter how the Allies set up, you know this, this, and this. And so I showed you what I got here, and I'm going to put them down. So you have the essential in China and the essential in these 3 invasions. So this is what you'll look like so far. Pretty easy, pretty basic. Now we're going to move on to Sarawak, another invasion we got to deal with that we're going to send troops to. Remember, there's either going to be nothing there or a British replacement. That's all he can put here. Well, he can put Indian forces, but I mean, there's 10 points here and 10 points here, so he can try to hold on to this oil supply, but we're going to go ahead and take this one. So either way, we're going to get this oil supply too. But whatever he does will depend, of course, how we attack. So we're going to go ahead and set up to bring a couple men, like I said here, to deal with this, and in case we miss this 1-to-1. And so we just need somewhere up here in a port another few infantry, and we're going to go 2-2 to be able to take care of this British, and then the 1-2 in case we lose here, or if I have to switch him I will, depending on how this attack goes. So this goes on this port of Haikui. Now remember, you don't want to set up in any ports in China, because the Chinese Flying Tigers will be able to intercept it, because they're only allowed to intercept anything coming from a Chinese port. They can't go out in the ocean at all and try to intercept anything else. So that takes care of this. So right now I have covered Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and Soraka. That takes care of these invasions. Now we're going to turn our attention to Malaysia and being able to take out Singapore in our turn flip-flop. Now to handle Malaysia, it's tough with this kind of setup. I mean, you don't have a lot of ships left, but if I see transport this 3-2 with this 6 ship over to this port and use one of these, it gives me a 1-to-1 on that Indian, which is what I'm going to have to do. It would take me more forces to try a 1-to-1 on this beach, so I think it's easier just to try it there, and we can take this with the paratrooper. So these forces, now remember I only have a Marine and an infantry here, so I can stack another infantry, and then the paratrooper can overstack also. And then I go ahead and move a 5-4 plane, and I move that to Singora. So all this can help me out on 2-to-1s or whatever, depending on what kind of interceptions he does. So that takes care of Malaysia. And now I have all this handled. Our next invasion is we want to try to take care of the Philippines in 2 turns. And again, we'll probably take another 1-to-1 here. And we already said these aircraft come and help us here. Now you'll note that the 2-4 aircraft, you might want to keep it out of the way over here in Manila, but as an American, you want them to kill that thing so you can get it back to Pearl. That's where you're going to need it in all the fighting, either Australia, not stuck in the Philippines. And as a side note, in the global war, it's even questionable because you may transfer this air wing here, or you don't have to. So a lot of times you may not even want to put the air wing in there. Let this fall, keep the air over there to help at Pearl. So anyways, we have the 5 aircraft helping there, but now in order to hit, we can try to use all the tanks we have and take a 1-to-1 on Manila. You know, it just makes sense to take the 1-to-1 here, because if you lose it, it's not a big deal. It ain't like he can supply Manila and run submarines. It's going to take a couple 9-factor fleets. And then just so I know, I'm always going to keep a couple 9-factor fleets in Japan for 2 reasons. One, 5 or 6 of them are going to be sent to the SW table. And then that leaves me like 15, 14 ships, which you're going to need there for SR duties. Maybe a little less, maybe 12. But I'd say 12, 14 ships for SR duties around the board. So you kind of need those there. Then the carrier task force, they'll be out here at Truck or somewhere like that with a complement of naval units too. So anyways, we're going to set up the Philippine attack coming from Japan. So 2 more fleets get based in Japan with 4 tanks. The armor units, which are going to head to the Philippines. The remaining of our forces are going to fill in China. We have to put enough 3-2s and a few 2-2s in here in order to hold these objectives. Remember, the Chinese are going to have 10 BRPs. And they can't make an attack at greater than 1-to-1. So basically they can attack a hex with 10. And we're going to try to see to it that with their aircraft they can actually get exchange bait. So we're going to try to see to it that we can at least have 10 on these objectives, and if not more. And then everything else I have went right here in Vietnam, because we have to stop the aid to China. So Mandalay to Kunming is where the aid is coming through first. When we cut it here, they have to fly from Lido to Kunming, and that's the one we will try to stop next. It gets a little difficult because the Chinese they're going to set up next, and they usually go on the border here, and then they can lend themselves to the British and help hold Lido. And then out here we are going to put a 3-factor ship to take this 1-2, and it's going to evade Leh. We take another 3 that takes this from Saipan to take the Gilbert Islands. Now the reason we have it on Saipan is because after the invasion the ships return to the port which they came from. So it'll return to Saipan. According to the rules for the island groups, at the end, I'd have to look it up, it's either combat phase or the end of the turn, if an island group contains a supplied piece unit of your side and there's no enemy pieces in the island group, then it automatically reverts to your control. So having a ship there constitutes the regulation for having a unit there, and then Guam automatically becomes ours. Guam's critical to make sure it falls so that if we don't get Manila, he can't get supplied this way to Manila and Rudd submarines. The only other supply he will have will be coming from Darwin here. So those 3 are set up. Then in Task Force 1, we have to have our Pearl Harbor Strike Force. So Task Force 1 has to have the 6 carriers like that, and then we give them 1 fleet factor just to give them a little air defense in case when we do the second strike on Pearl Harbor, an American carrier task force may show up. So there it is. That's Task Force 1. Now as your task force, of course this would be hidden from your opponent. They're set up on these boards here. Now that I'm talking about the task force, let me just say something. I don't like playing a game where somebody can set up all their stuff on the task force and have it covered by a border, and which you need to be moving things in it once in a while. And it's just so easy because you have to allocate your air first. And it's so easy for somebody to slip their hands in and go, oh, I didn't have these here. Of course, you can't see what he's doing. He just switches them over to there. And it's like, and I gotta say, when I play games, I don't trust people very much. And it just looks like, you can just tell they're doing something they shouldn't be. Because you look and you catch them, but you can't prove it. You can't say it because you don't see it. And I just don't like it. So what I have done is I made different cups. So the task force would be separated with a number on them. We'd have another table, and I'm not going to pull them out right now, but anything in task force 1 would be in this cup, another one would be in this cup, another one would be in a separate, they'd all be in separate cups. So when you're talking about task force 1, a guy will not be able to take pieces out of it and move it to another cup. That would be illegal, and you would see him do it. Now, when you take that task force and break it down into combat groups, I have other cups. For combat groups 1, 2, 3, how many you break it down to. And again, whatever would be in that combat group would be in a different cup. You would see a guy trying to take it after he allocated stuff and try to move the combat force around. It won't be allowed. Then within the combat groups, you have to have naval strike, land strikes, or caps. I would separate cups in that also. They're much smaller. And so where he allocated his air, they would be right in the open because the cups are covering what's in it. And therefore, if he tries to switch and move his hand into the cup and move it to somewhere else, you would see it and it won't be allowed. That's the way I play, and I will demand the guy I play with do it that way. Anyways, so that is Task Force 1. Now we got another task force ready to go. It's going to be Task Force 5. Task Force 5 is our other patrol that comes out here in the Java Sea. It'll end up in this spot here and will help support our invasions and protect the invasion fleets. So that is Task Force 5, the light carriers with 4 fleet factors. And that constitute 72 naval factors for the Japanese. Every single one of them is being used. That is how critical this first turn is with the Japanese using their fleets. And so it's led by a thread. So the Allies must do everything they can to have some of these invasions, at least one fail. And that's what I will try to do as an ally, as the Allied player. Anyways, the Japanese are done setting up, and it is the Chinese turn. For the Chinese, I just try to put most of my forces online with the Japanese for attritions, especially around here. Now, I don't like to put replacements around these bridgeheads because, you know, most likely the bridges are going to stay there for a while, and you can only move these by SRing, and so they would get stuck there. So I don't like to do it. Now I do it here, because that spot I probably will never need and never use, and I don't mind it there. And I might even put one replacement next to this one, but in case I want to attack that, I'd like to get enough forces surround that if he ever leaves me the opportunity to hit that 1-to-1. So I don't like putting replacements around there. And then we keep this out of range of the air base here, so he can't hit me. If he wants to move an air base here and move planes to go after that, he can. He won't do it on the first turn. Like we already stated, he needs everything he has to go into his attack. And the last setup will be the Communists. And so the Communists are pretty basic, just right up on the line, and they get 4 to start, and you put 2 on Yenin, the capital. And then, of course, they have partisans, and you look to see where you could put partisans. Well, guess what? The Japanese didn't give them any place to put partisans, so they are off the board for now. And that is the setup, and we will come back with turn number 1. Now remember, if you watch the Global War series, I've already showed you, you know, setting up the barrier and what you do down here. We're going to do the same thing down here. We're just coming down. The same thing sort of happens here, but we'll play it out because we have to see what forces we lose. But I'm mainly going to strike that twice, and then I'm going to look to return, if I can, to strike it again, or we are going to try to set up for an invasion of Midway and get these objectives going and make the carriers fight. Remember, there's a lot going on. I'm going to see if I can do it, because we need to get these objectives down here too. Moresby, Rabaul, Guadalcanal, and maybe, and I would even like this one, maybe out to Suva, Midway. We're going to just be moving the carriers out here and looking for a fight right away, as soon as possible. But at the same time, in case we lose the battle of the carriers, you want the Americans starting their counteroffensive, you know, way out here, like the Japanese had them start way out here, way out here. You want to keep this all, you know, in Japanese hands, so they have to start out here. And if I can make them start their invasion at Midway or Johnston by taking these two, then I'd rather have that also. So, all right, we'll be back.